You want a husband or just shelter?
The mail-order bride turned down every man until a rich cowboy asked, "You want a husband or just shelter?" The giant mail-order bride turned down every man who walked through the Silver Creek Agency door 11 men in 3 weeks, each one leaving rejected, while Cordelia Whitmore stood at her towering 6'4" height, arms crossed, jaw set, turning away ranchers and merchants and farmhands like she had all the time in the world instead of 3 weeks, until eviction and $8 between her and sleeping in the Montana snow. But when Sullivan Blackwood, the richest cowboy in the territory, walked into that cramped office where Cora had just sent away her 11th suitor, the silver mining baron turned cattle king didn't offer her compliments or promises or pretty words about needing a wife to make his house a home like all the others had. Instead, the rich cowboy leaned against the agency desk with his expensive boots and his tailored vest and his eyes that had seen through every lie fortune hunters had ever told him, and asked the giant mail-order bride a question that stopped her breath cold. "You want a husband or just shelter?" And Cordelia Whitmore, the woman who'd been maintaining her pride like a shield while her world crumbled around her, who'd been rejecting every man because they all wanted free labor wrapped in a wedding dress, who had exactly 21 days before winter came and she had nowhere to go, froze with her hand on the door she'd been about to walk through, her carefully constructed walls cracking wide open because someone had finally asked the one question she'd been too terrified and too proud to answer honestly. But why would a woman desperate enough to register with a mail-order bride agency turn down every single man who wanted her? What had these 11 rejected suitors really been offering that made her choose potential homelessness over marriage? And why would the richest cowboy in Montana territory, a man who could have any proper society woman he wanted, ask such a brutally honest question to a giant bride everyone else had dismissed as too proud and too difficult? Unless maybe, just maybe, Sullivan Blackwood understood exactly what it felt like to have people want you for everything except who you actually were. The silence in the agency office pressed down like a physical weight. Mrs. Hartley, the gray-haired woman who ran the mail-order bride service, cleared her throat awkwardly and busied herself with papers, pretending she hadn't heard Sullivan's question. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, carrying the first whispers of the winter that would arrive in weeks. Cora stood frozen, her hand still on the doorknob, her back to Sullivan, her mind racing through a dozen different responses and rejecting them all. Because the truth was dangerous. The truth was humiliating. The truth was that he'd seen through her in less than 30 seconds, and she didn't know whether to be furious or relieved. "That's what I thought," Sullivan said into the silence, his voice neither cruel nor kind, just matter of fact, like he was confirming something he'd already suspected. "You're not impossible. You're just honest about the wrong things and dishonest about the right ones." Cora spun around, her eyes flashing with anger that barely covered the panic underneath. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You walk in here with your expensive clothes and your fat wallet and think you can read people like a dime novel? You're just like all the others, another man who thinks he knows what a woman needs better than she knows herself." Sullivan didn't flinch, didn't look away, just studied her with those sharp gray eyes that made Cora feel like every secret she'd ever kept was written on her face in ink. "The others," he said slowly, "what did they offer you?" It wasn't really a question. It was a test. Cora's jaw clenched. She should walk out, should leave this smug rich cowboy to find some other desperate woman to psychoanalyze. But something in his voice, something that sounded almost like understanding rather than judgment, kept her feet planted. "The first one offered me a homestead," she said, her voice tight. "Said he needed a strong wife to help clear land and birth babies and work sunup to sundown. The second one owned a freight company. Said a woman my size could load wagons better than most men, and I'd be more useful than 3 hired hands. Her hands balled into fists. The third one didn't even pretend. Just asked if I could lift 100 pounds and said his back was giving out. And the others? Sullivan prompted quietly. Cora laughed, but it came out bitter as old coffee. More of the same. Men who looked at me and saw free labor. Saw someone too big to be precious, so she might as well be useful. Someone who should be grateful any man would marry her at all. Never mind that the marriage would be 20 hours of work a day, and a husband who'd never look at me like a wife, just like another ox in the barn. Her voice cracked. So yes, Mr. Blackwood, I turned them down. Every single one. Because I'd rather freeze to death with my dignity intact than spend the rest of my life being someone's unpaid farmhand who just happens to share his bed. Sullivan pushed off the desk and took 2 steps closer. Not threatening, not crowding. Just close enough that Cora could see the silver threads in his dark hair, the scar above his left eyebrow, the lines around his eyes that spoke of someone who'd spent a lot of time squinting into harsh sun and harsher truths. That's pride talking, he said, but his tone was gentle now, almost sad. And pride's a fine thing when you can afford it. But you can't, can you? You've got, 3 weeks? A month? Before whatever situation you're running from catches up? His eyes held hers. So I'll ask you again, and this time I want the truth. Not the version that protects your dignity. Not the story you tell yourself to sleep at night. The actual truth. Do you want a husband? Or do you just need shelter from whatever storm is coming? Cora's breath came short and fast. Her eyes burned with tears she absolutely refused to shed in front of this stranger. Because he was right. God help her, he was completely right. She'd been telling herself she was being selective, being careful, being smart about choosing a husband. But the truth, the ugly, shameful, desperate truth, was that time was running out, and she was terrified. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why does it matter to you? What difference does it make whether I want a husband or just need a roof over my head? Sullivan's smile was small and sad. Because I've been on both sides of that question. I've been the poor kid everyone looked through like I was made of glass. And I've been the rich man everyone suddenly sees. I know what it's like when people want something from you but don't want you. Know how it feels to question every smile, every kindness, every declaration of affection, because you can't tell what's real and what's just someone seeing an opportunity. He took another step closer, and now Cora could smell sage and leather and expensive whiskey on him. So if you need shelter, I can give you that. I've got a guest house on my ranch, small, but solid, warm, with a good stove and enough firewood to last 3 winters. You can stay there. No obligations. No expectations. No marriage required. His eyes didn't leave hers. But if you want a husband, if you want partnership and respect in someone who'll see you as a person instead of a solution to a problem, then we can talk about that too. But I need to know which one you're after. Because I'm done with people pretending to want me when they really just want what I can provide. Cora felt something break open in her chest. This man, this rich, successful, impossibly perceptive man, was offering her exactly what she'd been too proud to admit she needed. And he was doing it without making her feel small, without making her beg, without requiring her to trade her dignity for survival. I have $8, Cora heard herself say, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears, small and lost and achingly honest. $8 and 3 weeks before my lord's son evicts me. I worked as a housekeeper for 11 years, and when my employer died, his son decided he'd rather rent my room to minors who can pay more. Her hands twisted together. I registered with the agency because I had nowhere else to go. And I turned down those men because, Her voice broke. Because even desperate, even terrified, I couldn't make myself marry someone who'd treat me like livestock. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving Cora's face. Then he did something that shocked her into stillness. He held out his hand. Not commanding, not demanding, just offering. "Come with me," he said simply. "Right now. No decisions, no commitments, no expectations. Just come see the guest house. See what I'm offering before you decide whether you're too proud to accept it." Cora stared at his outstretched hand like it was a snake that might bite. Behind her, Mrs. Hartley made a small sound half gasp, half protest, because proper women didn't go anywhere alone with men they'd just met, rich cowboys or not. But Cora was 3 weeks from homeless and long past proper. She took his hand. His palm was warm and calloused, despite his wealth, the grip firm but not crushing. And something about that small detail made her throat tighten with emotion she didn't have names for. The ride to Sullivan's ranch took 20 minutes in his buggy. A sleek black affair with leather seats that probably cost more than Cora had earned in 5 years. Neither of them spoke. Cora watched the landscape roll past golden grassland, stretching toward mountains that already had snow on their peaks, cattle dotting the hillsides, fence lines that seemed to go on forever. This was his land. All of it. More wealth than she could comprehend, and he was offering her shelter without asking for anything in return. It felt like a trap. But if it was a trap, it was the kindest one anyone had ever set for her. The main ranch house came into view first, and Cora's breath caught. 3 stories of timber and stone, windows that gleamed in the afternoon sun, a wraparound porch that could have held her entire current living space. But Sullivan drove past it, following a path that wound through a grove of cottonwood trees, just starting to turn gold with autumn. And there, nestled in the trees like something from a storybook, sat a small house. Not a shack, not a shed. A real house with a stone chimney and glass windows, and a porch, just big enough for a rocking chair. Sullivan stopped the buggy and helped Cora down, his hand steadying her elbow with automatic courtesy. "Built it 5 years ago," he said, leading her up the porch steps. "Thought I'd use it for a foreman, but I never got around to hiring one I trusted enough to live this close." He opened the door, and warm air rushed out. He'd had someone light the stove before bringing her here, Cora realized. Had planned this. The interior was simple but beautiful. One main room with a kitchen area, a good iron stove already crackling with fire, a table with 2 chairs, shelves built into the walls. A doorway led to a bedroom just big enough for a bed and a dresser. Everything was clean, well maintained, ready for living. "It's yours if you want it," Sullivan said from where he stood in the doorway, giving her space to explore. "No rent, no obligations. Stay as long as you need, a week, a month, a year, forever. I don't care." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I meant what I said, Cordelia. I know what it's like to need help and be too proud to ask for it. Know what it's like to go hungry because accepting charity felt like admitting you were worthless." His eyes met hers across the room. "You're not worthless. You're just out of options. And there's no shame in that." Cora's vision blurred with tears she could no longer hold back. She turned away, not wanting him to see her cry, her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen table like it was the only solid thing in a world gone sideways. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this for a stranger? What do you get out of it?" Behind her, she heard Sullivan's boots on the wooden floor, heard him stop a respectful distance away. "Honestly? Peace of mind. I've got more money than I know what to do with. And every night, I go to sleep in that big house alone, wondering what the point of all this wealth is, if I can't use it to make even one person's life a little less hard." His voice dropped. My mother died in a charity hospital when I was 12 because we couldn't afford a doctor. I was working in the silver mines by 13, and I swore if I ever made something of myself, I'd never watch someone suffer when I had the means to help. Cora turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks now. Past caring about dignity or pride or any of the walls she'd built to protect herself. I can't just take this, she whispered. I can't just accept charity and give nothing in return. It's not, I'm not. She couldn't finish, couldn't articulate the tangle of shame and gratitude and desperate need that was choking her. Sullivan smiled, and it transformed his face from hard and knowing to something almost gentle. Then don't take it as charity. Take it as an investment. He walked to the table and pulled out one of the chairs, sitting down and gesturing for her to take the other. I'll be honest with you, Cordelia, because I think we're past the point of polite lies. I'm 35 years old, and I'm tired of being alone. Tired of women who look at my bank account before they look at my face. Tired of wondering if anyone would give a damn about me if I lost everything tomorrow. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes intense. You need shelter. I need to know that someone under my roof isn't there because of my money. So here's what I'm proposing a trade. You stay here, in this house, for as long as you want. In exchange, you have dinner with me. Once a week at first. Just dinner. Just conversation. Just two people getting to know each other without the pressure of courtship or the desperation of a mail order arrangement. His voice gentled. And if, after a few months, we find we actually like each other, if we find that what started as a practical arrangement has turned into something real, then we can talk about marriage. But if we don't, if we're not compatible, or if you meet someone else, or if you just decide you want to move on, you still keep the house. No strings. No recriminations. No debt. Cora stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was offering. That's insane, she said, but her voice held wonder instead of judgment. That's the most ridiculous, generous, insane arrangement I've ever heard. Sullivan's smile widened. Probably. But I'm rich enough to afford a little insanity, and you're desperate enough to accept it. So what do you say? You willing to try me? Or are you still too proud to accept help even when it comes without conditions? The fire in the stove crackled. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwood trees, their leaves whispering secrets to each other. Cora looked around the little house, at the warm stove, the solid walls, the bed visible through the doorway that represented safety and rest and the first real security she'd had in 3 weeks of gut-wrenching terror. Then she looked at Sullivan Blackwood, this strange, perceptive, impossibly kind man who'd seen through her pride and offered her exactly what she needed in the one way she could accept it. I have conditions, Cora heard herself say, and watched surprise flicker across Sullivan's face. If we're doing this, if I'm accepting this arrangement, then I'm not going to be your charity case. I'll stay in this house. I'll have dinner with you once a week, but I'm also going to work. She straightened her spine, drawing herself up to her full imposing height. I was a housekeeper for 11 years. I know how to cook, clean, manage accounts, organize a household. Your main house is too big for one man, and I'd bet my last $8 you don't have it properly managed. So I'll work for you. Not as a wife, not as an obligation, but as an employee. You pay me a fair wage, and I earn my keep. That way this isn't charity, it's just business. Sullivan studied her for a long moment, and Cora couldn't read his expression. Then, slowly, he stood and held out his hand again. Deal, he said. You work as my housekeeper. I pay you standard wages. And we have dinner together once a week to see if there's anything between us besides a practical arrangement. His eyes gleamed with something that might have been respect or might have been amusement. You're a hell of a negotiator, Cordelia Whitmore. Cora took his hand, and this time when their palms met, something electric passed between them. Not just relief, not just gratitude, something else, something dangerous. "So are you, Sullivan Blackwood," she said quietly. "So are you." The first dinner happened 3 days later, after Cora had moved her meager belongings into the guest house and started working in Sullivan's main house. She'd been right. The place was a disaster of bachelor living. Dust on the mantels, dishes piled in the sink, accounts scattered across his office desk like autumn leaves. Cora dove into the work with the focused intensity of someone who needed to prove she wasn't a charity case. Scrubbing and organizing and cooking meals, Sullivan could actually eat at a proper table instead of standing over the stove. He watched her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable, and it made her nervous in ways she couldn't quite name. When Sullivan knocked on her door that first dinner evening, Cora opened it to find him cleaned up, hair combed, wearing a pressed shirt instead of his usual work clothes. He looked younger somehow, less intimidating. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. Cora took it, hyper-aware of how her height made them nearly eye to eye. How different this felt from every other interaction with every other man who'd ever looked at her like a problem to solve. They ate in his dining room, a massive table that could seat 20 but held just 2. Sullivan had cooked badly, but he'd tried, and Cora found herself laughing at his burnt biscuits and oversalted stew in a way she hadn't laughed in years. "Tell me something true," Sullivan said over coffee, echoing the question he'd asked her that first day. "Something nobody else knows about you." Cora hesitated, her fingers wrapped around the warm mug. Then, quietly, "I wanted to be a teacher. Before my parents died, before I had to take housekeeping work to survive, I wanted to teach children to read. I loved books more than anything." Her voice went distant. "But women my size don't get to be teachers. They get to be housekeepers and farmhands and wives who work themselves to death by 40. Sullivan was quiet then. "I can't read very well. Never had proper schooling. Taught myself enough to manage accounts and sign contracts, but I stumble over big words. Makes me feel stupid sometimes, even with all this money." The confession hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Cora set down her coffee and looked at him, really looked, and saw not the rich cowboy who'd saved her, but a man who'd clawed his way up from nothing and still carried the scars. "I could teach you," she said softly, "if you wanted. Proper reading. It's not charity, it's just ... sharing something I'm good at." Sullivan's smile was slow and genuine and transformed his entire face. "I'd like that. I'd like that a lot." They talked until midnight, the conversation flowing easy as river water. And when Cora finally walked back to her little house under a sky full of stars, she realized something terrifying. She was starting to hope, not just for shelter, not just for survival, but for something real. The dinners became twice a week, then 3 times. The reading lessons started, Sullivan stumbling over words while Cora patiently corrected him, their heads bent together over books in his study. She learned he'd been engaged once to a woman who left him when he was poor and tried to come back when he struck silver. He learned about her brother, the one who'd beaten her for being too big, too expensive, too much trouble, until she'd run away at 16. They traded their wounds like currency, each confession buying deeper trust. And somewhere between the 3rd week and the 4th, Cora realized she wasn't just accepting shelter anymore. She was falling in love, but love was dangerous. Love meant vulnerability, and Cora had spent 11 years learning that vulnerability only led to pain. So when Sullivan reached for her hand one evening after dinner, when his fingers laced through hers, and his eyes held a question he was too careful to voice, Cora pulled away. "This isn't real," she said, her voice shaking. This is just ... gratitude. Proximity. Two lonely people pretending. Sullivan's jaw tightened. Is that what you think? That I'm pretending? I think you're a good man who made a business arrangement, and we're both confusing that with something it's not, Cora said, standing up, needing distance. I think in 6 months you'll meet some proper society woman who's actually your equal, and you'll realize I'm just the desperate mail-order bride you took pity on. Her voice broke. And I won't let myself believe this is more than what it is, because when it ends, it'll destroy me. Sullivan stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor, and the look in his eyes made Cora's breath catch. You think I'm going to leave you, he said, and it wasn't a question. You think I'm going to wake up one day and realize you're not worth the trouble. That's what they all did, isn't it? Your parents died and left you. Your brother beat you and drove you away. Your employer died and his son threw you out. Every man who ever looked at you saw labor instead of a woman. He took a step toward her, and Cora backed up until she hit the wall. So you've convinced yourself that everyone leaves, that you're too big, too much, too difficult to love, and you're rejecting me before I can reject you. That's not, Cora started, but Sullivan cut her off. It is, and I understand it. God knows I spent 5 years doing the same thing, keeping every woman at arm's length, because I couldn't tell who wanted me and who wanted my money. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the heat coming off him. But here's the difference between us, Cordelia. I'm done being afraid, done letting my past dictate my future, done pretending I don't feel what I feel, because it might hurt later. His hand came up to cup her face, gentle despite the calluses. I love you, not because you're grateful, not because you work for me, not because you're convenient. I love you because you're honest even when it costs you, because you'd rather freeze than compromise your dignity, because you negotiated a job instead of accepting charity, because you laugh at my terrible cooking and teach me to read without making me feel stupid. Cora's eyes filled with tears. Sullivan, I love you because you're exactly the right size, he continued, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Because when you stand next to me, I don't have to bend down, and you don't have to bend up, and we meet in the middle like equals. I love you because you turned down 11 men who would have given you shelter, and you only said yes to me when I offered you honesty instead. His voice dropped to a whisper. So you can push me away if you want. You can protect yourself, build your walls, convince yourself this isn't real. But it won't change the truth. I love you, Cordelia Whitmore, and I'm not going anywhere. The tears spilled over, racing down Cora's cheeks, and she made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. You're insane, she whispered. You're absolutely insane. Sullivan smiled, that crook smile that transformed his face. Probably, but I'm rich enough to afford it, remember? And then he kissed her. Not rough, not demanding, just tender and sure and full of promises he actually meant to keep. Cora kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, and for the first time in her 27 years, she understood what it felt like to be wanted, not for what she could do, not for what she could provide, but for exactly who she was. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sullivan rested his forehead against hers. So what do you say? He asked. You ready to stop turning down every man and actually accept the one who's offering you everything? Not just shelter, not just a job, but partnership, respect, love, all of it? Cora laughed through her tears. I say you're too good to be true, Sullivan Blackwood. But I'm done being too proud to accept good things when they're offered. She pulled back enough to look him in the eye. Yes, yes to dinners and reading lessons and falling in love with you. Yes to believing this is real, even though it terrifies me. yes to all of it. 6 months later, they married in the little church in Silver Creek, with Mrs. Hartley crying in the front row and half the town whispering about how the impossible bride had finally found someone impossible enough to match her. Cora wore a dress the color of cream and stood at her full height beside Sullivan. And when the preacher asked if she took this man as her husband, her "I do" rang out clear and certain and absolutely unafraid, because she'd finally learned the difference between needing shelter and wanting a home, between accepting charity and receiving love, between turning down every man because they weren't enough, and saying yes to the one who saw her as exactly enough, just as she was. And when Sullivan kissed her, his wife, his partner, his equal, in every way that mattered, Cora kissed him back with the fierce joy of someone who'd been starving and had finally been fed. Not with shelter, not with security, but with the kind of love that saw her completely and chose her anyway. The kind that didn't ask her to be smaller or quieter or less. The kind that simply said, "You're too big for everyone else, but you're exactly right for me." If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful love story like this one. Tell us in the comments what time you're watching from. Are you watching at midnight? When? You can't sleep? During your lunch break? On a quiet Sunday morning? We want to know when these stories find you. And tell us, have you ever been too proud to accept help when you desperately needed it? Have you ever had to choose between dignity and survival? Drop your thoughts below, and let's build a community of people who believe that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need someone. Subscribe now, turn on that notification bell, and we'll see you in the next story.